Today we will be talking about claim evidence reasoning. This is a strategy we can use when we write up our scientific ideas. The thinking processes that are involved are very similar to the ones that are used by scientists in the field. Now, before we go any farther, I want to talk about where we're going with this. In this class, eventually you're going to be writing up many of your lab reports using a claim evidence reasoning format that looks like this. The thought processes that go into this are very similar to the ones that go into a published scientific paper. First, you are going to write a claim, which is the answer to your research question. Then you are going to write about your qualitative and quantitative evidence. And in the last part, you are going to use the evidence you collected to justify your claim. We're going to go through this with an example, and as we do, I'm going to use a graphic organizer. Now, it's not something you will normally use in class, but I use it here so that you get a sense of the scientific thinking that goes into putting together a CER. Okay, let's get back to our example. We start with a research question. For example, is it safe to swim in this lake? We might make a hypothesis, a statement we can test, like, yes, it's safe to swim in the lake. Maybe we base this hypothesis on the fact that we saw people swimming in the lake last year when we visited. But our claim is something different. Our claim is going to be our answer to the question, and it's going to be based on evidence, as much evidence as we can possibly get. Even though a scientist might predict that it's safe to swim in the lake, good scientists are skeptical. That means they try to avoid jumping to conclusions before they've looked at the evidence. A good scientist understands that their hypothesis may be wrong, and if it is, evidence will show it. Good scientists do not make a claim until all of the evidence has been examined. Let's go back to the lake. We make a prediction that it's safe to swim in it. Now let's look at the evidence and use it to help draw conclusions and state a claim. We're going to use this handy little graphic organizer as a tool to help us collect our evidence. First, let's look at the water. It looks pretty clean from the helicopter, but when we get closer to the lake, we can see that it's pretty dirty. In fact, we see a little bit of garbage off to the side, but that's pretty common in lakes these days. This evidence is not enough to make a claim that the water's not safe, but it might be useful information. So let's put it in the top box of our evidence section. Water is brown, garbage in water. Let's look around the lake some more. We see this pipe that's discharging brown water into the lake. Next to the pipe, we see a sign that says, "Keep out, sewage contaminated water. Exposure may cause illness." There's a little no swimming sign at the top. Let's add that to our evidence. Our evidence is getting stronger. I think it's reasonable to make a claim that the water is not safe to swim in, but our claim gets a little stronger when we see a bunch of people in hazmat suits taking water samples and a chemical plant on one side of the lake and a nuclear power plant on the other. Let's add this evidence to our table. Finally, we see that the surface of the part of the lake that's near the chemical plant is covered with dead fish. Okay, I think it's very safe to conclude that this lake is not safe for swimming in. We can make our claim. It is not safe to swim in this lake. Now, we have to show our reasoning and justify our claim with evidence. This means explaining why our evidence supports our claim. First, we have brown water with garbage in it. In the reasoning section, we can write, "Could be a sign that the water is contaminated." And of course, if it's contaminated, it is not safe to swim in this lake. Next, we have the sewage pipe draining into the lake. Sewage is full of harmful bacteria. And since sewage is full of harmful bacteria, this supports our claim that it is not safe to swim in this lake. Third, we have the hazmat team taking water samples. This is a sign that there might be something dangerous in the water. And if there is something dangerous in the water, it is not safe to swim in this lake. Finally, we have a bunch of dead fish near the chemical plant. This implies that there is something in the water that is harmful to life. And if there is something in the water that is harmful to life, it is not safe to swim in this lake. So now let's take a closer look at the way you will be writing these up. They will be graded by a rubric, and you have the rubric in your notebook. It will also be in the Go Formative Claim Evidence Reasoning document. The first thing you're going to do is state a claim. This is going to be based on your evidence, and when you state a claim, state a simple sentence. Even though you're answering a question, don't start this with yes or with no. Also, don't go into details here. Don't present evidence here. Don't tell us why. Just write a simple one-sentence conclusion. Now, in the next section, you will present your evidence. In the lake example, most of our evidence is qualitative. That means it's based on observation and it doesn't involve too many numbers. When you write this section, the only thing you write about is the evidence. Don't talk about how it supports or doesn't support your claim. Don't talk about what it might mean. We just want the facts here, not inferences or interpretations. In this example, we say, one can observe that the water is brown and there is garbage floating in it. On one side of the lake, there is a sewage pipe draining into the water. We don't say what this means, just what we saw. Now, in other labs, you may have quantitative data as well, and the evidence section would be an appropriate place to put a table or a chart or a graph. But we don't have to do this in this particular example because we have no quantitative data. Now, the last section is the reasoning section. It is the most important part of the CER. This is where you use the evidence to justify the claim and tie everything together. The first thing you want to do is restate your claim. And a nice way to do it is to say the evidence shows that, or the evidence suggests that. Or if the evidence didn't show it, you say that too. The evidence does not suggest that. There are some sentence starters in your lab notebook. Take a look at them, use them. They might help you. After we state our claim again, this is where we connect our evidence to the claim. For example, the fact that the water is brown and that there is garbage floating in it could be an indication that the water is contaminated. The sewage draining into the water could substantiate this claim because sewage often has harmful bacteria in it. When you're expressing your logic, you can also bring in scientific concepts that you learned about in this class or in other classes. Now, once you have used your evidence to justify your claim, a good CER has a couple of other components. One of these is to discuss the limitations of your experiment or analysis. You can talk about things you didn't test, or talk about things you could have done differently, or talk about mistakes that happened. In this particular example, one of our limitations might be that we did not test the water ourselves, so we don't know what the identities or concentrations of the contaminants are. There are many different possible limitations that you can talk about in a CER. It's also a good practice to explain what the implications of your experiment are. In our case, if we tell people about the results of our experiment, maybe we could help protect swimmers from getting sick because of the not safe lake. Another thing you can do in this section is talk about future experiments or new questions that were raised by this experiment. Learning how to do the CER is going to help you in other science classes. And it's also going to prepare you for some of the larger, more detailed college-level write-ups you will be doing in future science classes. You should now have an idea of the kind of thinking processes that go into claim evidence reasoning.